Tonight, the Prime Minister is due to speak at the UN and call for a ceasefire in the Middle East. But as world leaders gather in New York, Israeli airstrikes continue in Lebanon. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he's instructed his military to fight at full force and has yet to respond to a proposed ceasefire deal. Keir Starmer will speak later at the UN's General Assembly and call for responsible global leadership. But will his message be heeded? Also tonight, the saga over Labour's deep-pocketed donor Lord Ali hasn't gone away, with more details emerging about when he loaned his flat to Keir Starmer. Elon Musk attacks the UK government for not inviting him to its tech summit. Given his influence, we'll ask if that's the right decision. And as one of the Tory leadership candidates gives journalists survival kits ahead of its party conference this weekend, we'll look ahead to what's expected to be a Birmingham beauty pageant. All that and more with Tom Baldwin and Raymond Chishti, who'll be with me for the next hour. It's Thursday, I'm Ali Fortescue, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, early this morning, there were reports from the US that we could see a ceasefire along the Israel-Lebanon border as soon as today. It followed a surge of diplomatic activity overnight, including a joint statement from the US, UK and European nations calling for a 21-day pause in the fighting. Tom Fletcher, a former senior diplomat here in the UK, described it as a potential watershed moment. An example, he said, of diplomacy fighting back after being battered over the last year. But 12 hours later, there's been no deal. And Benjamin Netanyahu had said he's instructed Israel's military to keep fighting at full force. And the Lebanon strikes have continued. On a day when world leaders are gathered in person at the United Nations in New York, diplomacy does not appear to have won today's battle. Well, in a moment, we'll be speaking to our correspondents. But first, the Israeli Prime Minister is now in New York ahead of his address to the United Nations General Assembly tomorrow. Speaking on the tarmac, he said Israel won't stop striking Hezbollah until it reaches its goals.
During the flight, I gave approval for the elimination of the head of the UAV unit and other things, and he was eliminated. My policy, our policy, is clear. We're continuing to strike Hezbollah with full force, and we will not stop until we reach all of our goals, chief among them the return of the residents of the north securely to their homes.
So Mr. Netanyahu will be speaking at the UN tomorrow, but this afternoon, the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, addressed the assembly, calling on Israel and the international community to act now.
Stop this crime. Stop it now. Stop killing children and women. Stop the genocide. Stop sending weapons to Israel. This madness cannot continue. The entire world is responsible for what is happening to our people in Gaza and the West Bank.
Well, Sky's Laura Bundock is in Cyprus for us this evening. But first, let's go to our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who's in New York, where the Prime Minister will be speaking to journalists this evening at the UN, of course. Dominic, I mean, it's been a pretty extraordinary day. Can you just remind us how it's all unfolded and how the tone has shifted over the course of the day?
I mean, it really has, Ali. As you say, it's been a kind of diplomatic roller coaster, because we had the emergency meeting of the Security Council last night, at which David Lammy was among many speakers who called for a political solution, a diplomatic solution to the crisis in the Middle East, the escalating conflict. And he said it was time for an immediate ceasefire. And you'd expect that his Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, will make the same call when he addresses the General Assembly as part of the General Assembly proceedings today in a couple of hours. And after that meeting, that Emergency Security Council meeting, at which Antonio Guterres, the Secretary-General, said that all hell is breaking loose in Lebanon, There was a concerted effort by all G7 countries, America, France leading the way, but Britain, the European Union and others, and 3 Middle Eastern countries to try and push for a ceasefire. And they seemed so confident, but by the end of the evening, an American senior Biden administration official was saying the following. He said, "I can share that we have had this conversation about the ceasefire with the parties and felt this was the right moment based on the call, based on our discussion. They're familiar with the text and we'll let them speak to their actions. We are expecting the deal in the coming hours." And then this morning, Benjamin Netanyahu arrives here and says our policy remains firm. We'll continue to strike Hezbollah until all our objectives are achieved. And while he was flying here, his Foreign Minister Israel Katz tweeted that there will be no ceasefire in the north. And what seems to have changed is privately, the Israeli Prime Minister is reported to have told the American diplomats and others that he was amenable to a ceasefire. Publicly today, he has distanced himself from that. And that seems to be in response to the kind of political backlash that we had to that news this morning in Israel. Members of his own government saying this is not the moment for Israel to pause in its fight against Hezbollah. So not for the first time, the Israeli Prime Minister has shifted his position in negotiations with the Americans. He's made the Americans look rather foolish. I think you can imagine that they will be fuming about this, asking for an explanation when they meet him today. And he has a chance to explain himself tomorrow when he addresses the UN General Assembly tomorrow morning. But I think the bottom line is that the best chance so far to end this conflict, which is spiralling out of control, has effectively been sabotaged or torpedoed by the Israeli leader himself.
OK, Dominic, there in New York for us. Thank you. Let's speak now to Laura Bundock, who's in Cyprus, where British troops are being moved ahead of a possible evacuation. Laura, it just feels like there's a bit of a disconnect between what's being said in New York and what's actually happening on the ground in the region. Tell us a bit about what's been going on where you are.
Well, I think they are definitely readying and they are certainly ramping up the plans here. RAF at Kriteri is one of 2 huge British military bases here in Cyprus, and because of the strategic location of Cyprus, it's often used as a hub for these large-scale evacuation operations. We know that the planning of this has been going on for months and months, but I think the addition of those extra 700 British troops this week shows that contingency planning has stepped up. As we've been hearing from the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary, all British nationals in Lebanon are being told to get out of the area as quickly as possible immediately. How does that happen? Well, there are 2 options, basically. One is by air, one is by sea. And at the moment, by air is by far the easiest, the quickest and probably the safest way as well. There are still commercial flights leaving Lebanon, but Beirut International Airport is still open. Although the majority of the international carriers have now stopped their services, there are flights out. There are, of course, is the option of the military stepping in at that point. So military planes, helicopters could be used. That's as long as the airport there stays open. If it closes, well, that's when the Navy would step in. There are 2 British Navy warships on standby in the eastern Mediterranean who could then move in to take people out of Lebanon and bring them back here to Cyprus. They would be processed here at the base. The trouble is, at the moment, we don't know how many people we're talking about. There are thousands still in Lebanon. We don't know how many of them would want to leave the country or who are well enough to leave the country at the moment. So lots of unknowns, and that's very much something for the kind of contingency operations to deal with at the moment. But tonight, the situation here in Cyprus is you have military planes, you have helicopters, you have warships, you've got pilots, you've got Foreign Office officials, Border Force officials, Royal Marines, all on standby. But I think the bottom line is what happens here next is very much dependent on what happens next between Israel and Hezbollah.
OK, Laura Bundock there for us in Cyprus. Thank you so much. Well, with Sir Keir Starmer set to address the UN later tonight, I spoke to the former British ambassador to the UN and now the chairman of the Geopolitical Advisory Gatehouse, Sir Jeremy Greenstock, and the former chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, the Conservative MP Alicia Kearns. Thanks both so much for joining us on Sky News this evening. So, Jeremy, can we start with you? I mean, it felt this morning like there was some optimism, like all the world leaders were gathered together. There could be a ceasefire, diplomacy might be working. But then there's this real disconnect between what's being said in New York and what's actually happening on the ground in the Middle East. Do you think there is much that the UN can actually do?
Well, there is a disconnect because the parties are not listening. And the optimism, I think, was completely misplaced because there was no reason to believe that either the Israelis or Hezbollah would agree to a ceasefire at this particular moment without knowing the conditions for that ceasefire. And probably on the Israeli side would not agree at this point at all. So we must look in this conversation to the reasons for that.
And what do you think the reasons for that are?
That Hezbollah is going to go on fighting until there is a ceasefire in Gaza, not in northern Israel. It's totally connected to the Gaza conflict. And I do not believe myself, and I think many observers would agree, that the Israelis can totally eradicate Hezbollah without an enormous war. And that would be bitter for all parties, including the Israelis. So we're a long way from any ceasefire on the current approach of the Israeli military into Lebanon at the moment.
OK, Alicia, when it comes to the new Labour government, how do you feel their handling of this has been?
Look, essentially the power is currently not sitting with the UK in terms of this. It's sitting with the US and France, clearly, who've moved forwards with this joint statement this morning. You've seen a number of countries sign it. It's interesting, given that David Lammy was one of the first to call for a ceasefire, that he hasn't signed this joint statement. But essentially the power does not sit with the UK in terms of it focusing on this. But the one thing I would say is that for too long, the UK has allowed Lebanon, the whole world has forgotten that Lebanon has been in a state of crisis. Now we are refocusing on Lebanon when for years it has been allowed to continue to drift in a way that has become fundamentally unfair for the people of Lebanon who've had no support at all.
What do you think Keir Starmer needs to do this evening to sort of show that leadership?
Well, the priority has to be getting British nationals evacuated. That is obviously what they are trying to do now. I'm worried that message isn't landing because there are still tens of thousands, we believe, of British nationals who are still in Lebanon. Then in terms of the priority is, of course, preventing escalation. Look, for the last few weeks, there hasn't been a focus on getting a ceasefire in Gaza. This potential military incursion into Lebanon has refocused people. They are now looking again about what we do to make sure that we have a ceasefire in Gaza as well. But the priority should be making sure that we are able to have along the southern border Lebanese armed forces. It is currently Hezbollah operated, Hezbollah maintained. But what we cannot risk, and my biggest concern, is that Hezbollah has been losing support in Lebanon, not completely, and in the south it will continue to be completely entangled with families, but its support for Bashar al-Assad in Syria, the attacks it's made on critics, the way in which the 18 Hezbollah politicians have undermined the stability and democracy of Beirut and essentially of Lebanon itself, have undermined the trust that Lebanese have in them. And we have to remember that Hezbollah is fundamentally a Lebanese force. It is not a Palestinian one. And there is a risk with a ground invasion that Hezbollah gets a renewed support, invigoration from the people of Lebanon, and that would be a serious risk.
So, Jeremy, do you think groups like Hezbollah fear the UN?
No, because the UN has no teeth unless the governments involved at the UN agree to impose something through force. There's been no Chapter 7 mandate, an enforcement mandate from the Security Council. So it's purely rhetorical unless the major members of the UN can agree actually to take action. And I don't think they're going to intervene militarily or in any way other than diplomacy and rhetoric at this moment.
Do you think they have less teeth than when you were permanent representative to the UN?
No, the UN has never had teeth. After all, let's remember the UN in its political emanation is only the member states agreeing in the forum to do something under the UN Charter. The UN is not a separate body that can take action here. So it's a good place for people to meet who don't agree on things. It's a good place to issue rhetorical and diplomatic statements, but there's no sign of enforcement action coming out of this dialogue.
And Alicia, we've obviously heard lots of talk of a potential ground invasion. I mean, how close do you actually think we are to that?
We thought we were in the same place at the start of August. I remember having a conversation with you about exactly that. And obviously we were able to de-escalate and move back from that brink. But at this time, the Israelis are saying very clearly that they plan to do a ground invasion. They have launched something like, I think, 3,000 strikes over the last 3 days. they are running out of targets that will be as easy to strike from the air. They have been very focused in their airstrikes within Lebanon, although there's still been far too much civilian loss of life. So I think it does come to the point where if their target is to prevent Hezbollah from being able to fire into the north of Israel, they do feel that it is now time for a ground invasion. And ultimately, since October 7th, the UK and the US, one of our foremost priorities was preventing a ground invasion of Lebanon. So this is something that the international community has been fearing for a long time, and it's really been on the cusp since July.
So, Jeremy, Keir Starmer has talked about the need for responsible global leadership in the last 24 hours. Do you think Benjamin Netanyahu has been irresponsible?
I'm not going to comment, make personal comments about a particular leader, but I do think the Israelis have started something for which they've got no visible exit route at this moment, because they're only relying on military enforcement. They're only relying on the military lever. There's no sign of an approach to a diplomatic or political end to this. And without that, it's going to go on a long time. And we've all observed that Prime Minister Netanyahu needs conflict to keep himself in office. So it's becoming very political inside Israel as well as internationally.
So do you think he's closed off to the idea of a diplomatic end?
Unless he agrees to talk about a political end to this, he is closing it off. And I do not believe that military action can lead to a settlement in Israel's interests. And
Alicia, you mentioned earlier the possibility of evacuations. Do you think lessons will be learnt from what happened in, for example, Afghanistan? Do you worry that we could see a situation like that again?
I hope so. After every evacuation, there is always a lot of soul searching within the Foreign Office where we say we're going to learn lessons. I know there was an enormous lessons learning operation after Afghanistan, but also after Sudan. But this is a really complex evacuation. You know, Sudan, we had neighbouring countries. We could do both air and sea evacuations. Here, we're relying on commercial for as long as Beirut airport remains open. And obviously, there's no reason to expect at this point that Israel would target it. But it does look like we're getting to the point where commercial flights might stop. That then leads us to sea, which is always difficult. There is no such thing as a straightforward sea evacuation. We've got obviously HMS Duncan ready and deployed. We've got helicopters and also aircraft already pre-deployed at Akrotiri in Cyprus. So obviously, if possible, the preference will always be for an air evacuation. And obviously, we know PGHQ and the Foreign Office are working very hard to prepare on this. But there is no such thing as an easy evacuation. And yes, I hope that lessons have been learnt.
And so, Jeremy, as Alicia says, no such thing as an easy evacuation. How important is it that this government gets that right? I mean, we're already hearing that flights are full, that some people are struggling to get out of Lebanon. How concerning do you think that is?
Well, I think it's a worrying situation, and at least the government has begun to take action. If it had left it to, days ahead, it would be much worse. So I agree with Ms. Kearns. We must try and do as much as possible by air before Beirut airport is compromised. But I think before this is over, a sea evacuation is going to come into play.
OK, that's all we've got time for, unfortunately. But thank you both. Really interesting discussion. Thanks for talking to us on The Hub this evening.
OK, thanks very much.
Well, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? Former Labour Party senior advisor Tom Baldwin and the former Conservative MP Raymond Chishti. Thank you both. And I should say that you also former Foreign Office Minister. And you dealt with things like getting people out of countries. How challenging is any evacuation?
What I would say, having been a Minister for Consular Policy, looking at what we're now seeing in Lebanon and seeing what's going on in Palestine and Gaza, our diplomats and our military officials would have been planning for this, different eventualities in the region. So therefore, with our bases in Cyprus, also increasing capacity there, looking at what the panel have said, looking at every possible route with regards to how do we get our British citizens out. There's probably about, from what we read in the media, about 10,000 British citizens in Lebanon. And the contingency plan would first be, how do we get them out, through commercial airlines? If not, which neighbouring countries do we need to get them through to get out? Or is it through by the sea route as well? So that contingency planning is absolutely been on the forefront of diplomats' mind and successive governments' mind. The key question here is this. Ceasefire. You need to be able to have that ceasefire to be able to put the operation into practice so you can get your citizens out as quickly as possible. The longer this goes on with regards to conflict, if you're looking at British citizens, then it makes it more difficult to get them out. So if you have a ceasefire for, say, 10 days or 21 days, that gives you the planning to be able to get your citizens out, the officials on the ground working with our military. So ceasefire in that regard is absolutely crucial. In the wider context, what we're now seeing with Hezbollah and also with Israel, the question is this. It's how do we ensure that we have a holistic, long-term solution? Hezbollah is saying they're using the force they are doing now against Israel with regards to what's happening in Gaza. The Prime Minister is at the UN. The Prime Minister has talked about global leadership. Well, the question there is the UK signed and drafted 242 Security Council resolution on the 1967 borders with regards to Palestine. So if you want to find a long-term solution and address the issues of a ceasefire now, the Prime Minister needs to categorically, along with other international partners, the US is key, is to say how they are going to deliver on 242 Security Council resolution. UK drafted it with regards to a strong, secure state of Palestine alongside a strong, secure state of Israel. Whether they do a summit in the UK, call it the Chequers Summit. The UK needs to take initiatives to find a long-term approach and solution to a two-state solution in that regard. In the short term, pressure needs to be applied by the United States on Israel. If I'm being completely frank, they're the ones who can apply the maximum pressure on Israel, and you then need other Arab countries with regards to who can apply that pressure on Iran. Qatar has a communications with Iran, so who can apply maximum pressure on Iran and communications to stop Hezbollah, and with regards to who can play that leverage with regards to the United States. UK has a massive convening power. The United Kingdom Prime Minister can today, if he wants to apply pressure on Israel, could say, if we do not find a way forward on two-state solution, if we don't, the United Kingdom will take the next step, and he said it before, in terms of the measures it would take, recognise the state of Palestine, what steps we're going to work towards delivering on that two-state.
Are we seeing enough pressure from the Prime Minister, Tom, do you think?
What we are seeing, I think, is a Prime Minister who's genuinely back on the world stage. Last Prime Minister effectively subcontracted his foreign policy off to Lord Cameron, House of Lords. Understand why, he had other things to worry about. But the amount of foreign travel that Keir Starmer has done since July the 4th, the amount, you talk to Europeans, they're saying Britain's back. Now, I don't think Keir Starmer's going to fix the Middle East crisis on his own any more than any government could fix this on their own. But to be a stable ally, to be really active, to be really engaged in issues in the Middle East, in issues about Europe, in issues to do with global poverty, issues to do with climate change, I do think this is a far more active government which wants to take its place back on the world stage compared to the last one.
But I think what I would say on that, though, Tom, no, you're right. This isn't a take time, but what it can do is those steps. So every government that's come in, since 1967. So we are committed to a two-state solution. But what have they actually done to deliver a two-state solution in that regard? But I think successive governments, because the Arab peace plan was there with regards to a two-state solution. It was a Labour government then. We had a Conservative government. And I'm saying across both governments.
Do you think you made any progress in the last 14 years?
What I would say is what we're clearly seeing now, enough progress has not been made at all. And also use of force cannot achieve a long-term peace in the region. That's got to be diplomacy, and it's got to be through political engagement.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
The UK word. Bill Clinton did Camp David, and he nearly got the parties to where they need to be. No successive government, has put that convening power with regards to whether it's the UK having that international summit. But we do need to then, at the UN now, when the Prime Minister says the United Kingdom will take leadership in the world, well, people will then say, you're asking us to support the UK and the international community in Ukraine. Absolutely on sovereignty of Ukraine. But then also in the Palestine 242 Security Council resolution, UK drafted it on the two-state solution. What practical things are we doing to deliver that? Because that is in the long-term interest of security of Israel and Palestine.
The truth is, Britain doesn't have a great deal of influence in the Middle East. You know that.
We have.
We don't, and it's been hollowed out in recent years. I mean, Alicia Kearns was saying this just now. How do you rebuild that? You show that you're a strong, stable, active ally. And that, I think, is what Keir Starmer is trying to do, starting tonight.
Well, look, what I would say on that is the UK, I accept, the US has a massive influence in the region. But what the UK does have, long history in the region, and people in that across different countries respect the UK's role. So therefore, working with the US, we need to actively work towards finding a solution on the two-state.
That's fine, but don't over-politicise it, because it's quite easy for someone like me to say, you had 14 years and they haven't had 14 weeks. It's a very big challenge for any government.
Of course I get that. And I think, and David Cameron put forward the contact group, on finding a two-state solution. The question then is what has that contact group done? And I'm not making it partisan, because this issue over here, it's gone on for far too long, and we now need people around the world to say, look, use of force, which Israel is applying, is not delivered safety and security for Israel. It hasn't. And at the same time, if we want to find long-term security, because what happens in that region, will then affect in Israel and Palestine, it affects the region and it affects what's our security back in the UK and around the world. So I think we need concrete steps as to what we are going to do to help deliver two states.
We're going to come back to you. Really interesting discussion. I could leave you to it, actually. It's so interesting. But we will come back to you. Watching the Politics Hub coming up. Why the world's richest man didn't get an invitation to the government's International Investment Summit. The Conservatives prepare to party in Birmingham, with 4 candidates hoping to star as their future leader. And we've got breaking news about Baroness Saida Varsi. She's quit the Conservatives tonight with a furious attack on the party, which has responded in the last few minutes. We'll tell you what's happening next. Stay with us.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky's West of England correspondent.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. We help you to understand the world with us.
I'm Adam Parsons, I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place for news.
This conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Well, in a developing story this evening, Baroness Saida Varsi has quit the Conservative Party. She posted on X, she said that this is a sad day for me. I'm a Conservative and remain so, but sadly the current party are far removed from the party I joined and served in cabinet. My decision is a reflection of how far right my party has moved and the hypocrisy and double standards in its treatment of different communities. Well, shortly afterwards, a Conservative Party spokesperson said complaints were received regarding divisive language allegedly used by Baroness Saida Varsi. Baroness Varsi was informed an investigation was about to begin earlier this week. We have a responsibility to ensure that all complaints are investigated without prejudice. Well, our political correspondent Liz Bates is with me now. Liz, I mean, this has just happened. It's pretty significant. She's first Muslim in cabinet, I think. She's been a big figure in the party. Tell me what's happened.
A huge figure in the party, Ali. And to be honest, this has all just happened in the last couple of hours. We're still trying to get to the bottom of this. It seems like a private row has really spilled over now into a big public spat. So we're kind of looking through these statements, trying to figure out what on earth's gone wrong. It seems like you look at what Baroness Varsi tweeted. This was just a couple of hours ago. She ends by saying a timely reminder of the issues that I raise in my book, Muslims Don't Matter. She has long raised issues. She's always had a difficult relationship with the Conservative Party that she served on this issue of Islamophobia, and she's been a very public critic of the party. So it seems like something like that has gone on. And then you see a couple of hours later this statement from the Conservative Party, which says that she has been using divisive language and there was an investigation about to begin into her next week. So it looks like she's gone before that investigation started. I think the big question here is, did she jump or was she pushed? And I think in the next few hours and the next few days, we will get a bit more information on what's really gone on here.
Absolutely fascinating. Thanks, Liz. Well, soon we will be talking a bit more about Keir Starmer and what has been going on in the Labour Party with claims about gifts and donations. But that story, I'm sure, is going to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be Conservative Home's Deputy Editor Henry Hill and Professor at the University of Glasgow, Kezia Dugdale. Well, as I mentioned, we are going to talk now about the Prime Minister. He's repeatedly defended himself, but it is a story that doesn't seem to be going away. After a week of scrutiny over the number of free gifts that Sir Keir Starmer's received today, Downing Street had to deny that he broke any rules when he used a party donor's penthouse to record a COVID broadcast in 2021, urging people to work from home.
At times like this, we must all put the national interest first and play by the rules. Of course, I understand that sticking to the rules can be inconvenient, but stick to the rules we must.
Well, our correspondent Gurpreet Narwan is here with me. I mean, this just isn't going away for the Prime Minister, is it? I guess, just tell us a bit about what's happened today and how damaging you think this part of it is.
Yeah, so to bring you up to date, what you saw there, that was a Christmas broadcast from Sir Keir Starmer from back in 2021 when he was leader of the opposition, urging people to stick to the COVID rules and stay at home. And it very much looks like he's at home. In the background, you can see pictures of his family. But he was, in fact, in a flat owned by Lord Ali, and that's the wealthy Labour donor who is at the centre of a controversy that's really engulfing Sir Keir Starmer's government. Now, Number 10 say that no COVID rules were broken and that the use of that flat wasn't declared because it fell under the £300 threshold. And that also goes for another occasion in which the flat was used to broadcast a message following the death of the Queen. But it is uncomfortable for the government because it's already come under fire for its relationship with Lord Ali. He's a figure that most people wouldn't have heard of up until now. But people are asking, who is this guy? Why is he giving senior Labour politicians gifts and donations, and potentially what are his intentions? And it's part of a broader row about gifts and hospitality, with Sir Keir Starmer having accepted about £100,000 worth of gifts and hospitality since becoming Labour leader for things like football and concert tickets. Some people would see no problem with that. However, it has kicked off a debate about the political wisdom of accepting these kinds of freebies. Let's have a listen to what Labour's Harriet Harman had to say.
I think the idea that he can't go and stand in the stands because of security, people really understand that. And therefore, he was offered the director's box because it's secure. The difficulty is that even if he carried on paying his season ticket, the director's box is worth much more. So people will see it as somehow the director's having access to him. And it's actually the perception
and also,
thing that's the thing.
He can pay for the director. He can pay to sit in hospitality. Like, there are different hospitality packages where you're not in the stand.
Now, Sir Keir Starmer maintains that all of this is above board, that he's declared everything and that it's all transparent. But declaring stuff doesn't make it OK. The whole point of the declaration system is that it forces MPs to be prepared to defend the decisions that they make. And now Sir Keir Starmer is being forced to defend his decisions. And the questions that are being asked aren't about whether he's broken a black and white rule. They're questions about his political wisdom and judgment at a time when he's priming the public for what could be quite painful spending cuts. And while he is by no means the first MP or the first Prime Minister to accept donations and gifts, the Tories, as you know, were all over it too, he did promise us a different kind of politics. And for some people, this behaviour jars with that promise.
OK, thanks so much, Gurpreet. I'm sure we will be covering more on this very soon. You can hear that full exchange with Harriet Harman on the Electoral Dysfunction podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen now. And a reminder that the new episode will be out tomorrow. Right, let's bring our panel back in, shall we, Tom and Raymond. Tom, I'm interested to hear what you think about... I mean, I guess it feels like, you know, the people around Keir Starmer should have stopped the fact that we're still talking about it, do you think? Is that the problem?
I'm a bit puzzled why we're still talking about it, to tell the truth. I mean, there are scandals in politics. I've covered some of them, I've reported I've broken some of them. Bernie Ecclestone was a scandal that involved changing policy for £1 million. That was the last Labour government. We saw COVID law-breaking again and again in Downing Street, the most prosecuted workplace in the country. We saw hundreds of millions of PPE contracts, public money, being handed out to their mates and their cronies. This is about borrowing a flat from a friend. Now, whether it could be handled better or not, maybe it could, but no policy was changed, no public money was involved, no laws were broken, it was registered, things were registered which needed to be registered. And I do think people need to take a little breath here, get some sense of perspective, and journalists who want to say this engulfed thing, as we just heard, the government, I don't think it is. You know, there's some false equivalence being drawn, and responsible news broadcasters like Sky should make it clear this is very different to what we saw under the last government.
But do you think part of the problem is that he went so hard on people like Boris Johnson for
breaking the law, for handing out hundreds of millions of public money to mates? Yes, he did. None of that's involved here. So don't say double standards, because it's not the same thing.
And is part of the problem that Labour have declared so much of this?
They've declared what they need to declare because they follow the rules and they don't break the law. What we saw previously was rule-breaking, law-breaking and corruption.
So, but do you think there's a problem with the communications, you know, with the team in Number 10?
I think there's people doing incredibly difficult jobs. That moment trying to prepare for the Prime Minister's speech to the General Assembly of the United Nations at a time of great crisis for the world. And they're being asked about borrowing a flat from a friend. I'm sorry, I'm baffled actually by how disproportionate some of this news coverage is getting.
Yeah. What do you think, Raymond?
Well, I think the question is this: it's the standards that one sets themselves, and I think with Keir and the Prime Minister, he said, "Look, you know, I will do things differently, and it'll be country before party," and you know, just taking a different perspective from what Thomas just said. It's with regards to the previous situation that you had with the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the donors and the wallpaper. We saw the Labour opposition front bench saying it was completely unacceptable, the scale of donations, what's going on. And then if you look at what was promised about, you know, country before party, and then you now suddenly see, we talked about a flat, but we're then seeing the scale of the whole issue, a pass being given to a Labour peer for Number 10, who has been funding clothes, holidays, accommodation, you know, for Labour politicians.
What's the scandal?
So
what's the scandal here?
The question on this is the question is the optics that people...
Optics.
Let me finish. Will ask is, why is someone, you know, giving so much money with regards to for different individuals within the Labour Party who make policy across the board? I get what you were saying and the Prime Minister was saying, well, he's already a Labour donor, so therefore there's no issue of influence. But the question then is do you buy your influence within the Labour Party at different levels with regards to how much money you have? And the same thing arose with regards to the civil servant who was appointed in the Treasury Department by Rachel Reeves, who had given money to the Labour Party. And therefore you have one after the other, and then further details come. If I just say this, The same thing happened with Boris Johnson when the issue first arose with regards to Partygate in November. If he had said, come out clearly straight at times, says, look, with regards to how rules were being done, with regards to the unprecedented situation, we could have looked at these things in a different manner. But it was no, and further stuff came out. So sadly, I think what we see with Labour and Keir Starmer, bit by bit, more donation, and therefore this flat, when did it happen? What COVID rules were in place?
To prove your point, you would have to say that these snippets of froth coming out here are somehow going to lead us to a trail of systematic corruption, which is what we saw under the last government, law breaking, which is what we saw under the last government, and the whole mass of scandal which was associated with Boris Johnson. None of that's happened. But I know Wahid Ali. He's been around for years. He's been giving money to the Labour Party for years. If you're going to say it's a scandal, you've got to be careful here, and implying stuff. You've got to show what policy he was trying to change, what he was trying to use his 10-day access to Downing Street with a pass, which he handed back because he didn't quite know why he'd been given one, for. Right? You've got to say that there's some beat. You know, all we've got is kind of winks and nods and implications that there's something smelly here. You know, he borrowed a flat from a friend. He took a donation for some clothes and some dresses for his wife so they could look professional in a campaign. If you want to draw a line between those points and a point way off in the distance where some great unforeseen scandal, well, yeah, it's just a leap of imagination.
But you accept that the optics is bad, that when you're asking people to tighten their belts, when you're cutting winter fuel payments, and you've got these, you know, big numbers when you're spending on clothes and
but it's not like they're sort of living the high life.
Someone should have gripped that.
Yeah, look, there's a difference between optics, which is an impression, and something substantial, right? And, you know, it's not like kind of they're living a high life and, you know, saying, let's get some more clothes, Vic, because it's great, we're having a marvellous time here. These are people from quite a humble background who wanted to look professional in election campaigns. They didn't want to let people down. They took advice about what they should wear, and somebody paid for it. Now, it could have been done better, in my view. It could have been done for a clothing allowance, which, you know, TV presenters get a clothing allowance so they can look professional on TV. I think the Prime Minister should get a clothing allowance.
You know, the question I say is this, it's the perception that people
Perceptions.
See,
perception is not reality.
No, the perception is, and this
optics,
is where,
perceptions.
you know, you take it from a viewpoint where you've advised Labour before. I'm a Conservative former Member of Parliament, and therefore people say, yes, of course, you would say that because you're linked to those political parties. The reality on that is this, taking it outside of the Westminster bubble, from where the Prime Minister started, Keir Starmer, to where he is now in the minus in the polls, it's not what you and I say, it's how it looks to the public. You know, public, you have to make tough, difficult decisions. We've got to cut the winter fuel payments for the most, disadvantaged and those who need the most help. But at the same time, you know, if it's okay, if you're the Prime Minister and you've got friends, you've got money who can pay for your clothes, your glasses, you know, who can pay for flats for your children to go to school in the way you want them to go. It's that optics of one rule for one and another rule for the other.
But you keep using this word optics because that's the best you've got.
Well, no,
the best you've got. Let me just say. You use the word optics because you actually haven't got anything substantial there. You haven't got a scandal. You haven't got any law breaking. You haven't got any corruption. You haven't got any policy change. You haven't got any public money involved. So you go, yeah, it doesn't look good, though, does it? It doesn't look good because of the way this is being reported, with the way it's being exaggerated out of all proportion, and the false equivalence being drawn. So when you get beyond optics, when you can find something beyond optics and impressions, come back and tell me what the scandal is, and I'm happy to debate it with you.
I'm very happy.
I've got to ask you, Tom, could we see you entering number 10 to help with some of these communication problems?
I've been there, done that, got the T-shirt, scars on my back. I'm very happy doing what I'm doing.
Ruling it out?
I'll come and you can play this game all night. I mean, I heard you after Fiona Bruce's job at Fresh in Time. Is that true?
Oh, I wish.
So is that a yes? Is that a yes? We've got a media story, everyone.
Well, we will come back to you both, but I'm ruling that out for now. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. Elon Musk hits back after being snubbed from the government's International Investment Summit. And there's just one topic in town for the Tories as they prepare for their party conference. We'll examine who's in pole position to become their next leader. Hello, welcome back. Well, the Prime Minister is hosting an international investment summit next month, just 2 weeks before the autumn budget. The government will be hoping to attract hundreds of the world's leading chief executive, financiers, investors, as part of their efforts to show that the UK is open for business. But one name conspicuously not on the list is the world's richest man, Elon Musk. Well, the tech entrepreneur responded to the post on social media, responding to the apparent snub. He said, "I don't think anyone should go to the UK when they're releasing convicted paedophiles in order to imprison people for social media posts." I should say sex offenders are not actually on the list of people that were released early. Well, you don't have to think back that far to remember a quite different relationship between the billionaire and the UK.
We feel very privileged. We're excited to have you. Right, so I'm going to start with some questions and then we're going to open it up. Let me get straight into it. So, Bill Gates said, "There is no one in our time who has done more to push the bounds of science innovation than you."
Well, it's kind of him to say.
Well, let's bring our panel back in, shall we? Raymond, what do you think? Should we... Jeremy Hunt was saying that Elon Musk was thinking of building cars here and this is bad news. What do you think? Do you think that we should be inviting Elon Musk to these sorts of events?
Well, let me first of all say this. The statement we just saw by Elon Musk with regards to come to the UK, I think is complete and utter nonsense. The United Kingdom is a great country, and I think if people are looking at the United Kingdom from around the world and the country where people from all different backgrounds come together and contribute to make our country a great place in the world to be, it is the United Kingdom, a land of opportunity. So I think that statement by him is complete and utter nonsense. The reality is with regards to who the government choose to invite to the investment conference, I think is a matter for them. But what I would say is this, what the Prime Minister said at the United Nations, United Kingdom's leadership in the world with regards to global leadership. A key factor in the world at the moment on national security is with regards to what happens in space. Satellites that orbit the world, the United States used to have the largest amount of satellites which detect what's going on in different parts of the world. If you're looking at Ukraine, with regards to where the troop movement was taking place, you're looking at the orbits and satellites. Elon Musk has one of the largest space operations that there is in the world. So therefore, in politics and in world, you don't necessarily have to agree with someone. You have to then look at engaging at different levels. So I would say it's a matter for the United Kingdom government, but whether it's regards to AI or space, you need to find a way to engage in your national interest.
And let me just bring Tom in quickly. I mean, how do you think the government should be managing this relationship? Does it matter?
Well, look, there's a distinction between Elon Musk, the scientist, the engineer, the entrepreneur, Elon Musk, the social media personality. He's taken over Twitter and turned it into a cesspit. He turned it into a cesspit full of trolls, and he's become a troll himself. During the riots, Elon Musk was trolling this government and trolling Britain. He was saying civil war was about to break out. He was saying that people were being locked up for using free speech. He was saying that Keir Starmer was becoming Stalin. Now, when you're trolling the government like that, you're not a great scientist and engineer, you're just a troll. And you can make a distinction about how you treat him, but if I was Elon Musk, having thought all these things about Britain, having civil war, being locked up for free speech, I wouldn't want to come here anyway. He must be terrified of coming here.
OK, thank you both. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Tory leadership rivals prepare to battle it out at party conference. We'll look at who's best placed to win over the members.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live. Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion has just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
It's our
snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks, but taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
We're seeing an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious. Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We've been crushed. Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, we're shifting our attention now from the Labour Party conference to the Conservative Party conference because they're heading to Birmingham this weekend and one topic is going to dominate. That is the question of who should be the next Conservative Party leader. And here you go. There are the four candidates. I think you probably know them all by now. Robert Jenrick, James Cleverly, Kemi Badenoch and Tom Tugendhat. And I should say, one of our correspondents, who will remain nameless, got this lovely box from Team Tugendhat in a bit of a charm offensive today. So look, you've got a Tom ball, we've got a lolly with his face on it. I don't know if you can see that. We didn't get these when you wanted to be the Tory party leader at one moment.
I'm offering a merit-based system of government, and an aspirational nation. And therefore, if I'm about merit-based system of government, it's not about the boxes you give.
This was fully declared, I should say. But what it shows us is, look, they're on a bit of a charm offensive. Do you care about who wins the Tory party leadership? What's your view on all this?
Look, the last Labour government was sustained in power not just by the record of the previous Conservative government, or indeed its own record, but by the antics of the Conservative Party in opposition, because they abandoned the centre ground with William Hague, Ian Duncan Smith, Michael Howard, and it does matter what the opposition does. Just reading that box says, I read that as, I'm a tug end hack. Now, I can think of a few journalists that might apply to as a aphorism, not naming any names.
Do you think these sort of stunts work?
I think if it's about gaining traction, with engaging people, but, sure. But what I would say is these are, having served with them in Parliament, these are competent, capable candidates.
Are you backing anyone?
Who have a lot to offer. No, I'm not backing anyone.
Wait to see who wins first.
Not at all.
Come on,
not at
give
all.
us something. There must be someone that is...
Look, I said before...
Are you ruling anyone out?
Look, what I am saying is, as somebody who wants to see the Conservative Party win, they want to see, what each candidate have to offer. They've got specific skills, they're competent, capable. But for us as a party, if we want to win, we need to see what is the values, the vision that can actually, inspire the nation, bring about effective opposition, hold this Labour government to account, and also those people around the country, north, south, east and the west, who left the Conservative Party at the last election. How do we bring them together? And if you ask me, my vision on that would be...
Baroness Varsi has left today. She is a moderate Conservative, a One Nation Conservative, one I've actually got huge respect for. Yeah. She's left today because the Conservative Party is still moving further away from the centre ground. And when you see people like her, of her calibre leaving, you've got a problem.
But Tom, what I would say on that, specifically on Sayeda Varsi is a good colleague who served the party, as chairman with distinction. Her concerns on Islamophobia, with regards to how that's been dealt with in the party. In my view, she has, a real merit in raising those specific issues. I raised those points, with the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, when he was running for leadership, and I raised it again in Parliament when there was a real issue about treating all faiths equally. The government did not appoint an independent advisor on Islamophobia. They had one for anti-Semitism, absolutely right and proper. So there are legitimate concerns on how those issues are treated, but that should not be the case why you should leave this great...
But look, when you contrast that, contrast that with Labour Party, anti-Semitism. One party's moved to the centre ground, dealt with a problem, the other party has got a big problem.
We'll come back. And we've
there you go. I'm afraid that is all we've got time for, but we have had a good panel this evening and for some really lively debates. See you on Monday at the Tory Party conference.